All right, let's dive into one of the absolute cornerstones of modern AI, artificial neural networks. If you've got an exam on the horizon, or you just really want to finally get what's happening inside tools like ChatGPT, then this right here is the study guide for you. We're going to break it all down.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to kick things off with the original inspiration. Yep, the human brain, before we actually build our own digital neuron. Then we'll take a little tour of what I like to call the neural network zoo to see all the different kinds. After that, we'll get into the real magic of how they learn, and we'll wrap up by figuring out how to fine-tune that whole process.
You know, before we can even think about building an artificial network, we've got to understand the original. So first up, let's look at the incredible piece of engineering that's inside all of our heads, the biological neuron. And there it is, the basic building block of our entire nervous system. The easiest way to think about it is like a tiny, tiny processor. You've got information coming in through these little branches, those are the dendrites. It all gets processed in the main cell body, and then, if the signal is strong enough, zap, a new pulse fires down that long tail, the axon, to talk to the next neuron down the line.
So the main thing to remember here is that every part has its job. The dendrites are the receivers, the cell body is the processor, the axon is the transmitter, and the synapse is what passes the message along. It's this simple, elegant flow, receive, process, transmit, that early AI researchers looked at and thought, hey, we can build that.
Okay, so how do we take that amazing biological design and turn it into something a computer can understand? We're going to move from the biological neuron to its very first artificial cousin, the perceptron.
This slide just lays it out so perfectly. You can see the analogy, right? The inputs, in1 and in2. They're just like the signals coming into the dendrites. Now, each of those inputs gets multiplied by a weight, and you can think of that weight as how strong the connection or the synapse is. The main node adds it all up, just like the cell body, and then an activation function makes a simple choice. Do I fire or do I not fire?
So how does a single one of these things actually learn? Well, it's this really beautiful, simple loop. First, you just give it some random weights to start. Then you show it some data, it calculates that weighted sum we talked about, and uses its activation function to make a guess. Then, and this is the key part, it figures out how wrong its guess was. That's the error, and uses that error to adjust its weights just a little bit. You just do that over and over and over again.
But let's be real, a single neuron isn't all that powerful, either in your brain or in a computer. The real power, the magic, happens when you start connecting millions of them together. And it turns out there are a whole bunch of different ways to wire them up, each one specializing in a different kind of task. So welcome to the Neural Networks Zoo. The big idea here is that you need the right tool for the job. Different problems need different network designs. For something basic, you might use a feed-forward network where the data just marches straight through. But for images, you'll want a convolutional network because they're great at seeing patterns. And for things that happen in a sequence, like words in a sentence, you need recurrent networks, which actually have a kind of memory.
Now this slide is your exam cheat sheet right here. Seriously, got an image problem like facial recognition? You're thinking CNN. Dealing with a sequence of data like translating a language? That's a job for an RNN, or its big brother, the LSTM. And what if you want to create something totally new, like a piece of art or a deepfake? Then you're going to want to look at a GAN.
Okay, so we've got the building blocks and we've seen the different blueprints, but how does a network with millions of these connections actually learn anything? The answer is this really clever and honestly kind of intuitive algorithm called backpropagation.
The whole learning thing is basically a two-step dance. First, you have forward propagation. That's when your data flows all the way through the network, from the very beginning to the very end to make a prediction. Then you have backward propagation. That's where the error you calculated flows backward, from the output all the way to the input, telling every single connection how to get a little bit better for the next try.
And here you can see that dance in action. The forward pass, that's the blue arrow, shows your data moving through the network to make a guess. Then, once we see how far off that guess was, the backward pass kicks in. That error signal, the red arrow, flows all the way back, whispering to every connection exactly how it needs to change. Let's just break that down into 4 simple steps so it really sticks. Step 1, the forward pass. Make your prediction. Step 2, calculate the error at the end. Step 3, this is the secret sauce. You propagate that error backward, figuring out how much each and every weight was to blame for the mistake. And finally, step 4, you update all those weights. That's it.
Now, theory is great and all, but if you've got an exam, you know that seeing the numbers actually move is what really makes it click.
So let's walk through one complete learning cycle with a super simple example.
Okay, first, the forward pass. We push our inputs into the network. They travel through all the layers, getting multiplied by those initial random weights along the way. And after all the math is done, the network spits out its very first prediction, around 0.89.
Step 2. Let's see how wrong it was. We were hoping for a 1, but the network guessed 0.89. We plug those numbers into a simple formula, and we get a single value that tells us the total error. This one little number is what's going to power the entire rest of the learning process.
And now for the magic, the backward pass. We start at the end, at the output, and we use that error value to figure out how much those final weights were responsible for the mistake. This tells us exactly which direction to nudge them to get closer to the right answer next time.
But we don't stop there. We keep that error signal flowing backward, all the way to the hidden layer. The error from the output is used to figure out how much the hidden layer's weights messed up. And just like that, every single weight in the network gets a tiny little update. That is one complete step of learning.
So we've seen the mechanics of how a network learns, which is awesome. But how fast it learns and how well it learns, that's a whole other story. That part is controlled by a set of external knobs and dials that you, the engineer, get to set. And these are called hyperparameters. And probably the most important knob you can turn is the learning rate. Just look at this graph. If you set it too high, your updates are way too big and the error just explodes. Set it too low and it'll take forever to learn anything. The goal is to find that Goldilocks zone, the good learning rate that gets your error down fast and smooth.
So just to be crystal clear for your notes, hyperparameters are all the settings you decide on before you start training. This is stuff like the learning rate, of course, but also things like batch size, how many examples it looks at once, and epochs, how many times it goes through the entire dataset. Getting this combination right is basically the art of machine learning.
Another huge choice you have to make is the activation function. That's the little gatekeeper inside each neuron that decides if it should fire. And picking the right one is crucial. For a simple yes or no answer, you'll probably use sigmoid. For the hidden layers of most modern networks, ReLU is the king because it's super efficient. And if you have a problem with lots of possible answers, softmax is what you need at the very end.
So when you boil it all down, what are these things? Neural networks are just incredibly powerful pattern-finding machines. They're built on this simple, beautiful loop. Make a guess, measure your error, and adjust. Do that a few million times, and you get some amazing results. We've built machines that can learn from their mistakes. Which kind of leaves us with one last big question to chew on. Can we ever teach them to truly understand?